That's a good way to start. Who wants hard spankings is how we're going to start off this morning. Hey, no using the wand to hit your brother, and pick up that book.
Nuts.
We are feisty this morning. Everyone has to get ready for school. I've already been told, we've had a myriad of conversations about bodily functions this morning, including the fact that mommy apparently has bad breath, which is, a benefit to you that you're not close to us today. But that's the life of the toddler, and I'm noticing I still have makeup on from last night. Let me just introduce you yet again to the best makeup remover known to man. And if you're spending a lot of money on makeup remover, just stop. Doesn't matter if you have kids or not. This is what you should be. It's a secret of any woman on television and any mom. Pampered Sensitive wipes. Why? Because they're made to get a lot of difficult things off. It's the wall. So there we go. Dual purpose. Good stuff. Okay, today we actually have a little bit of more serious news, and I'm going to focus a little bit on a crime wrap-up, which is something that I don't tend to do because, well, there's a lot of diverse news stories to always get to, and, concentrating on the worst of the worst isn't my favorite thing. But I think there's a few different stories that illuminate a common theme that we should be talking about. Right before we got on Coffee Talk yesterday, there was a shooting in the Netherlands that was just breaking, and we had to wait a little bit to get a little more information. But it looks like, according to government officials there, and thank you to those who wrote us from the Netherlands, it's so cool to know that we have folks overseas also tuning into SmartHER News here in Texas. It's really neat. It looks like it's a terrorist attack. It looks like the suspect is known to authorities, although we don't know very many specifics. But that came just shortly after, of course, we've been looking at this attack, also categorized as a terrorist attack in New Zealand from a very different profile criminal. Today in New Zealand, the Prime Minister was talking again about the attack, and one of the things she was talking about is saying that she's not going to be mentioning the name of the shooter, something that we haven't done here on SmartHER News, as I wanted to focus more on the victims. I think that's the best use of your energy right now as the pieces of the crime get put together. Probably a similar philosophy should be applied to what's going on in the Netherlands too, as we gather more information and we're learning more about the victims there. But it is interesting to see which crimes we focus on as kind of this groupthink of the media and which crimes we don't. And there's a great story today out of New York that you might have seen and this is the sort of story that in journalism gets me so excited for SmartHER News, because it's an amazing, cool story that then illuminates a larger point and maybe a deeper dive on a subject. So here's the mini story before we get to the big story. The mini story is that there's a refugee family in New York City that's living in a homeless shelter. They're refugees from Nigeria, and the little boy is 8 years old. And he came to America a little bit over a year ago and wanted to join the chess club at his school. Started out not knowing anything about chess. And now, about a year later, he is the state champion in the state of New York for the kindergarten to third grade level, which is so cool, right? What a great story about learning a skill and, overcoming, living in a homeless shelter. And the family not having the money even to enroll him in the chess club, and here he's the champion. There's a GoFundMe page based on his story that is set up apparently to help the family figure out a place to live now. But the family is applying for asylum in America, and the reason why they're doing it is, again, illuminating a larger point in a story that's actually been a little bit ignored. They fled from Nigeria because they're Christian, and the number of Christians being murdered and persecuted in Nigeria is a big story that we should all be paying attention to, in part because there is an Islamic terrorist group, Boko Haram, that continues to be a steady force in the area. And Nigeria is the largest economy in Africa. It's the most populated country. There's questions about whether the government's sort of turning the other way as Boko Haram attacks these Christian communities because they want to set up an Islamic state. And the staying power of this Islamic terrorist group, although not an immediate threat necessarily to Europe or to America, is something that we should all pay attention to. Also in Nigeria, though, it's not just Boko Haram. There's another militant group, Muslim militant group, that is a group of nomadic herders that has Muslim roots that go back hundreds of years and have been in constant tension with landowners or farmers. Depending on the region in Nigeria, these landowners or farmers happen to be Christian. And if you speak to people that are actually in Nigeria, or you read their interviews like I have, they'll say, well, Boko Haram and this group of nomadic herders have sort of joined forces, or at least seem to be sharing a strategy and tools to go after these particular groups of Christians. And it looks like, instead of, what has been historically tension between those that are nomadic and those that want to set up farms, look more to be religious persecution. So the reason why I'm paying attention to what's happening in Africa, even though it's not necessarily a direct threat to the United States, is that you have to look at the picture of Islamic terrorism overall. Boko Haram as a group has pledged allegiance to ISIS. If you look back at bin Laden's letters from his compound, Al-Qaeda, the leader of Al-Qaeda, talks about wanting to recruit or train Boko Haram. So it's a network. We tend to really try to divide these terrorist organizations into very specific channels so that we can sort of organize in our mind who's the threat to us immediately and who's not. But it's, if you look at the movement overall and the groups that are gaining power or have staying power, that's significant, right? What's not a threat today can be a threat tomorrow. What hasn't gained a real state, or what group hasn't gained a real state, can gain a state tomorrow. And we're looking at, if you look at Islamic militants in Africa, they've continued to gain territory, especially in certain areas. Boko Haram is one that continues to gather strength. So I think it's interesting, again, to take that small story of what's happening to this family in New York City that a lot of folks are focusing on, and then think about, well, this is the big backstory. This is why the family's even in America. And this also illuminates a really important point for immigration in America. This family is applying for asylum. Asylum is reserved for those that are facing persecution that's very clear. So someone coming from an area that says, I feel threatened because of safety in my city, is not as strong of an argument as someone that says, I'm facing murder because of what I believe as far as my religion. That is what asylum is for. That's why seeking asylum and gaining asylum in America can be very difficult, because you have to prove persecution. From the outside looking in, it looks like this family has a good case. But this is why asylum seekers that are coming from south of the American border have a harder time making this argument. Because although they can certainly be under threat, a security threat, because of what's going on with drug cartels, for example, in their country, it's not necessarily persecution due to their religious beliefs or their gender, or something that's in that category for asylum. So I think that's important to mention. But some of you have sent me some notes about there's not being a focus on, we're focusing on, the media is focusing on crimes where the victims are Muslim in New Zealand because these mosques were targeted. And I understand that it can appear that there can be a double standard about where the media focuses. But I just want to point this out. I mean, first of all these crimes and all these persecutions are worthwhile of coverage. But especially when it comes to Africa and Christian persecution, none of the major news outlets have gathered this story out of Nigeria, because it's mainly being reported by Christian news sources that are basing it on reports that can't be necessarily verified. It doesn't mean it's not happening. Just means that there's not a journalist on the ground that's able to be an outside observer. So it's challenging, is what I'm saying. That doesn't mean, again, we don't cover it, but we need to put it in the right context. Just a final thing, just to wrap up. This is sort of a, I just finish on two quick stories. One of the great, again, looking at what crimes get a lot of attention, one of the great unsolved mysteries of the last, I don't know, more than 100 years has been, who is Jack the Ripper? And there's a new study that says that they have identified, these researchers have identified this serial killer in London in the late 1800s. There's problems with it, but it's one of those stories that continues to fascinate no matter how many years after the crime actually was committed. And then I'm going to end on one just kind of happy note because I think we all need it. If you want just to look at some pretty pictures today, just look up the hashtag superbloom or Google it. There's a super bloom of poppies in California, and you'll probably catch ones from around the world. These are wildflower blooms that are happening mainly after huge rain periods, and they're creating these amazing fields of wildflower that just sort of challenge even the imagination. In one town in California, though, they actually had to shut down the roads because there were too many people coming wanting to take social media pictures in these fields of flowers. So if you just need a palate cleanser, you know, that's what I would suggest Googling today. The roads are back open, but, you know, everyone's looking for that one social media shot. You know what I mean? I don't know what they're talking about. I can't. Anyhow, guys, hope you have a good day. Let me know if you see any other stories you'd like us to cover on SmartHER News, info@smarternews.com, and check out our website. We have all of our sources listed, so if you want to read more about any of these stories, there's a quick pathway to the articles so that you can at least read one article of substance on any one of the topics that we discuss. Okay? SmarterNews.com, and have a great day, guys. I'll talk to you later.